Section 13 of The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Maxey. The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, Volume 1. The Case of the Dixon Torpedo by Arthur Morrison, Part 1. Hewitt was very apt in conversation to dwell upon the many curious chances and coincidences that he had observed, not only in connection with his own cases, but also in matters dealt with by the official police, with whom he was on terms of pretty regular and indeed friendly acquaintanceship. He has told me many an anecdote of similar happenings to Scotland Yard officials with whom he has exchanged experiences. Of Inspector Nettings, for instance, who spent many weary months in search of a man wanted by the American government, and in the end found by the merest accident, a misdirected call, that the man had been lodging next door to himself the whole of the time, just as ignorant, of course, as was the inspector himself as to the enemy at the other side of the party wall. Also of another inspector, whose name I cannot recall, who, having given rather meager and insufficient details of a man whom he anticipated having great difficulty in finding, went straight down the stairs of the office where he had received instructions and actually fell over the man near the door, where he had stooped to tie a shoelace. There were cases, too, in which a great and notorious crime had been committed, and various persons had been arrested on suspicion. Some were found among them who had long been badly wanted for some other crime altogether. Many criminals admit their deserts by venturing out of their own particular line of crime into another. Often a man who got into trouble over something comparatively small found himself in for a startlingly larger trouble, the result of some previous misdeed that otherwise would have gone unpunished. The ruble note forger Mirsky might never have been handed over to the Russian authorities had he confined his genius to forgery alone. It was generally supposed at the time of his extradition that he had communicated with the Russian embassy with a view to giving himself up, a foolish proceeding on his part, it would seem, since his whereabouts, indeed even his identity as the forger, had not been suspected. He had communicated with the Russian embassy, it's true, but for a different purpose, as Martin Hewitt well understood at the time. What that purpose was is now for the first time published. The time was 1:30 in the afternoon, and Hewitt sat in his inner office examining and comparing the handwriting of two letters by the aid of a large lens. He put down the lens and glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece with a premonition of lunch, and as he did so, his clerk quietly entered the room with one of those printed slips which were kept for the announcement of unknown visitors. It was filled in a hasty and almost illegible hand, thus: name of visitor, F. Graham Dixon. Address, Chancery Lane. Business, private and urgent. "Show Mr. Dixon in," said Martin Hewitt. Mr. Dixon was a gaunt, worn-looking man of 50 or so, well, although rather carelessly dressed, and carrying in his strong though drawn face and dullish eyes the look that characterizes the lifelong strenuous brain worker. He leaned forward anxiously in the chair which Hewitt offered him, and told his story with a great deal of very natural agitation. "You may have possibly heard, Mr. Hewitt, I know there are rumors, of the new locomotive torpedo which the government is about adopting. It is in fact the Dixon Torpedo, my own invention, and in every respect, not merely in my own opinion, but in that of the government experts, by far the most efficient and certain yet produced. It may travel at least 400 yards farther than any torpedo now made, with perfect accuracy of aim, a very great desideratum, let me tell you, and will carry an unprecedentedly heavy charge. There are other advantages, speed, simple discharge, and so forth, that I needn't bother you about. The machine is the result of many years of work and disappointment, and its design has only been arrived at by careful balancing of principles and means, which are expressed on the only 4 existing sets of drawings. The whole thing, I need hardly tell you, is a profound secret, and you may judge of my present state of mind when I tell you that one set of the drawings has been stolen. From your house? From my office in Chancery Lane this morning. The 4 sets of drawings were distributed thus. 2 were at the Admiralty office, one being a finished set on thick paper, and the other a set of tracings therefrom, and the other 2 were at my own office, one being a pencil set, uncolored, a sort of finished draft, you understand, and the other a set of tracings similar to those at the Admiralty. It is this last set that is gone. The 2 sets were kept together in one drawer in my room. Both were there at 10 this morning, of that I'm sure, for I had to go to that very drawer for something else when I first arrived. But at 12, the tracings had vanished. You suspect somebody, probably? I cannot. It is a most extraordinary thing. Nobody has left the office, except myself, and then only to come to you, since 10 this morning, and there's been no visitor, and yet the drawings are gone. But you have searched the place? Of course I have. It was 12 o'clock when I first discovered my loss, and I've been turning the place upside down ever since. I and my assistants. Every drawer has been emptied, every desk and every table turned over. The very carpet and linoleum have been taken up, and there is not a sign of the drawings. My men even insisted on turning all their pockets inside out, although I never for a moment suspected either of them. And it would take a pretty big pocket to hold the drawings, doubled up as small as they might be. You say your men, there were 2, I understand, had neither left the office? Neither, and they are both staying in now. Worsfold suggested that it would be more satisfactory if they did not leave till something was done toward clearing up the mystery. And although, as I have said, I don't suspect either in the least, I acquiesce. Just so. Now, I'm assuming that you wish me to undertake the recovery of these drawings? The engineer nodded hastily. Very good. I will go round to your office, but perhaps you can tell me something about your assistants. Something it might be awkward to tell me in their presence, you know. Mr. Worsfold, for instance. He is my draftsman, a very excellent and intelligent man, a very smart man, indeed, and I feel sure, quite beyond suspicion. He has prepared many important drawings for me. He's been with me for nearly 10 years now, and I've always found him trustworthy. But of course the temptation in this case would be enormous. Still, I cannot suspect Worsfold. Indeed, how can I suspect anybody in the circumstances? The other now? His name's Ritter. He's merely a tracer, not a fully skilled draftsman. He's quite a decent young fellow, and I have had him nearly 2 years. I don't consider him particularly smart, or he would have learned a little more of his business by this time. But I don't see the least reason to suspect him. As I said before, I can't reasonably suspect anybody. Very well. We will get to Chancery Lane now, if you please, and you can tell me more as we go. I have a cab waiting. What else can I tell you? I understand the position to be succinctly this. The drawings were in the office when you arrived. Nobody came out, and nobody went in. And yet, they vanished. Is that so? That is so. When I say that absolutely nobody came in, of course I except the postman. He brought a couple of letters during the morning. I mean that absolutely nobody came past the barrier in the outer office. The usual thing, you know, like a counter with a frame of glass over it. I quite understand that, but I think you said that the drawings were in a drawer in your own room, not the outer office, where the draftsmen are, I presume. That is the case. It's an inner room, or rather a room parallel with the other and communicating with it, just as your own room is, which we have just left. But then you say you never left your office, and yet the drawings vanished, apparently by some unseen agency, while you were there in the room? Let me explain more clearly. The cab was bowling smoothly along the Strand, and the engineer took out a pocketbook and pencil. I fear, he proceeded, that I am a little confused in my explanation. I am naturally rather agitated. As you will see presently, my office consists of 3 rooms, 2 at one side of a corridor, and the other opposite. Thus, he made a rapid pencil sketch. In the outer office, my men usually work. In the inner office, I work myself. These rooms communicate, as you can see, by door. Our ordinary way in and out of the place is by the door of the outer office leading into the corridor, and when we first pass through the usual lifting flap in the barrier. The door leading from the inner office to the corridor is always kept locked on the inside, and I don't suppose I unlock it once in 3 months. It has not been unlocked all morning. The drawer in which the missing drawings were kept, and in which I saw them at 10 o'clock this morning, is at the place marked D. It is a large chest of shallow drawers in which the plans lie flat. I quite understand. Then there is that private room opposite. What of that? That is a sort of private sitting room that I rarely use except for business interviews of a very private nature. When I said I never left my office, I did not mean that I never stirred out of the inner office. I was about in one room and another, both the outer and the inner offices, and once I went into the private room for 5 minutes. But nobody came either in or out of any of the rooms at that time, for the door of the private room was wide open, and I was standing at the bookcase. I'd just gone to consult a book, just inside the door, with a full view of the doors opposite. Indeed, Worsfold was at the door of the outer office most of the short time. He came to ask me a question. "Well," Hewitt replied, "it all comes to the simple first statement. You know that nobody left the place or arrived except the postman, who couldn't get near the drawings, and yet the drawings went. Is this your office?" The cab had stopped before a large stone building. Mr. Dixon alighted and led the way to the first floor. Hewitt took a casual glance around each of the 3 rooms. There was a sort of door in the frame of ground glass over the barrier to admit of speech with visitors. This door Hewitt pushed wide open and left so. He and the engineer went into the inner office. "Would you like to ask Worsfold and Ritter any questions?" Mr. Dixon inquired. "Presently. Those are their coats, I take it, hanging just to the right of the outer office door over the umbrella stand?" "Yes, those are all their things, coats, hats, stick, umbrella." "And those coats were searched, you say?" "Yes." "And this is the drawer, thoroughly searched, of course?" "Oh, certainly, every drawer was taken out and turned over." "Well, of course, I must assume that you made no mistake in your hunt. Now tell me, did anybody know where these plans were beyond yourself and your 2 men?" "As far as I can tell, not a soul." "You don't keep an office boy?" "No. There would be nothing for him to do except to post a letter now and again, which Ritter does quite well for." "As you are quite sure that the drawings were there at 10 o'clock, perhaps the thing scarcely matters. But I may as well know if your men have keys of the office." "Neither. I have patent locks to each door, and I keep all the keys myself. If Worsfold or Ritter arrive before me in the morning, they have to wait to be let in, and I'm always present myself when the rooms are clean. I have not neglected precautions, you see." "No. I suppose the object of the theft, assuming it is a theft, is pretty plain. The thief would offer the drawings for sale to some foreign government?" "Of course. They would probably command a great sum. I've been looking, as I need hardly tell you, to that invention to secure me a very large fortune, and I shall be ruined, indeed, if the design is taken abroad. I'm under the strictest engagements to secrecy with the Admiralty, and not only should I lose all my labor, but I should lose all the confidence reposed in me at headquarters, should, in fact, be subject to penalties for breach of contract, and my career stop forever. I cannot tell you what serious business this is for me. If you cannot help me, the consequences will be terrible. Bad for the service of the country, too, of course." "Of course. Now tell me this. It would, I take it, be necessary for the thief to exhibit these drawings to anybody anxious to buy the secret? I mean, he couldn't describe the invention by word of mouth." "Oh, no, that would be impossible. The drawings are of the most complicated description, and full of figures upon which the whole thing depends. Indeed, one would have to be a skilled expert to properly appreciate the design at all. Various principles of hydrostatics, chemistry, and electricity and pneumatics are most delicately manipulated and adjusted, and the smallest error or omission in any part would upset the whole thing. No, the drawings are necessary to the thing, and they're gone." At this moment, the door of the outer office was heard to open, and somebody entered. The door between the two offices was ajar, and Hewitt could see right through to the glass door left open over the barrier and into the space beyond. A well-dressed, dark, bushy-bearded man stood there, carrying a handbag, which he placed on the ledge before him. Hewitt raised his hand to enjoin silence. The man spoke in a rather high-pitched voice and with a slight accent. "Is Mr. Dixon now within?" he asked. "He's engaged," answered one of the draftsmen. "Very particularly engaged. I'm afraid you won't be able to see him this afternoon. Can I give him any message?" "This is the second time I have come today. Not 2 hours ago, Mr. Dixon himself tells me to call again. I have a very important, very excellent steam packing to show him that is very cheap and the best on the market." The man tapped his bag. "I have just taken orders from the largest railway companies. Can I not see him for 1 second only? I will not detain him." "Really, I'm sure you can't this afternoon. He isn't seeing anybody. But if you'll leave your name." "My name is Hunter. But what good is that? He asked me to call a little later, and I come, and now he is engaged. It's a very great pity." And the man snatched up his bag and walking stick and stalked off indignantly. Hewitt stood, gazing through the small aperture in the doorway. "You'd scarcely expect a man with such a name as Hunter to talk with that accent, would you?" he observed musingly. "It isn't a French accent nor a German, but it seems foreign. You don't happen to know him, I suppose?" "No, I don't. He called here about 12:30, just while we were in the middle of our search, and I was frantic over the loss of the drawings. I was in the outer office myself and told him to call later. I have lots of such agents here, anxious to sell all sorts of engineering appliances. But what will you do now? Shall you see my men?" "I think," said Hewitt, rising, "I think I'll get you to question them yourself." "Myself?" "Yes, I have a reason. Will you trust me with the key of the private room opposite? We'll go there for a little while you talk to your men in this room. Bring them in here and shut the door. I can look after the office from across the corridor, you know. Ask them each to detail his exact movements about the office this morning, and get them to recall each visitor who's been here from the beginning of the week. I'll let you know the reason for this later. Come across to me in a few minutes." Hewitt took the key and passed through the outer office into the corridor. 10 minutes later, Mr. Dixon, having questioned his draftsman, followed him. He found Hewitt standing before the table in the private room on which lay several drawings on tracing paper. "See here, Mr. Dixon," said Hewitt. "I think these are the drawings you were anxious about." The engineer sprang toward them with a cry of delight. "Why, yes, yes," he exclaimed, turning them over. "Every one of them. But where? How? They must have been in the place after all, then. What a fool I have been!" Hewitt shook his head. "I'm afraid you're not quite so lucky as you think, Mr. Dixon," he said. "These drawings have most certainly been out of the house for a little while. Never mind how. We'll talk of that after. There is no time to lose. Tell me, how long would it take a good draftsman to copy them?" "They couldn't possibly be traced over properly in less than 2 or 2.5 long days of very hard work," Dixon replied with eagerness. "Ah, then it is as I feared. These tracings have been photographed, Mr. Dixon, and our task is one of every possible difficulty. If they have been copied in the ordinary way, one might hope to get hold of the copy. But photography upsets everything. Copies can be multiplied with such amazing facility that once the thief gets a decent start, it is almost hopeless to checkmate him. The only chance is to get at the negatives before the copies are taken. I must act at once, and I fear, between ourselves, it may be necessary for me to step very distinctly over the line of the law in the matter. You see, to get at those negatives may involve something very like housebreaking. There must be no delay, no waiting for legal procedure, or the mischief is done. Indeed, I very much question whether you have any legal remedy, strictly speaking." "Mr. Hewitt, I implore you, do what you can. I need not say that all I have is at your disposal. I will guarantee to hold you harmless for anything that may happen. But do, I entreat you, do everything possible. Think of what the consequences may be." "Well, yes, so I do," Hewitt remarked with a smile. "The consequences to me, if I were charged with housebreaking, might be something that no amount of guarantee could mitigate. However, I will do what I can, if only from patriotic motives. Now I must see your tracer, Ritter. He is the traitor in the camp." "Ritter? But Never mind that now. You are upset and agitated, and had better not know more than is necessary for a little while in case you say or do something unguarded. With Ritter I must take a deep course. What I don't know, I must appear to know, and that will seem more likely to him if I disclaim acquaintance with what I do know. But first, put these tracings safely away out of sight. Dixon slipped them behind his bookcase. Now, Hewitt pursued, call Mr. Worsfold and give him something to do that will keep him in the inner office across the way, and tell him to send Ritter in here. Mr. Dixon called his chief draftsman and requested him to put in order the drawings in the drawers of the inner room that had been disarranged by the search, and to send Ritter, as Hewitt had suggested. Ritter walked into the private room with an air of respectful attention. He was a puffy-faced, unhealthy-looking young man with very small eyes and a loose, mobile mouth. "Sit down, Mr. Ritter," Hewitt said in a stern voice. "Your recent transactions with your friend Mr. Hunter are well known both to Mr. Dixon and myself." Ritter, who had at first leaned easily back in his chair, started forward at this and paled. "You are surprised, I observe, but you should be more careful in your movements out of door if you do not wish your acquaintances to be known. Mr. Hunter, I believe, has the drawings Mr. Dixon has lost, and if so, I am certain that you have given them to him. That, you know, is theft, for which the law provides a severe penalty." Ritter broke down completely and turned appealingly to Mr. Dixon. "Oh, sir," he pleaded, "it isn't so bad, I assure you. I was tempted, I confess, and I hid the drawings, but they are still in the office, and I can give them to you. Really, I can." "Indeed," Hewitt went on. "Then in that case, perhaps you'd better get them at once. Just go fetch them in. We won't trouble to observe your hiding place. I'll only keep this door open to be sure you don't lose your way. You know, down the stairs, for instance." The wretched Ritter, with hanging head, slunk into the office opposite. Presently he reappeared, looking, if possible, ghastlier than before. He looked irresolutely down the corridor, as if meditating a run for it, but Hewitt stepped forward and motioned him back to the private room. "You mustn't try any more of that sort of humbug," Hewitt said with increased severity. "The drawings are gone, and you have stolen them. You know that well enough. Now, attend to me. If you received your deserts, Mr. Dixon would send for a policeman this moment and have you hauled off to jail. That is your proper place. But unfortunately, your accomplice, who calls himself Hunter, but who has other names besides that, as I happen to know, has his drawings, and it's absolutely necessary that these should be recovered. I'm afraid that it will be necessary, therefore, to come to some arrangement with this scoundrel. To square him, in fact. Now, just take that pen and paper and write to your confederate as I dictate. You know the alternative if you cause any difficulty." Ritter reached tremblingly for the pen. "Address him in your usual way," Dixon proceeded. "Say this: 'There has been an alteration in the plans.' Have you got that? 'There has been an alteration in the plans. I shall be alone here at 6 o'clock. Please come, without fail.' Have you got it? Very well. Sign it and address the envelope. He must come here, and then we may arrange matters. In the meantime, you will remain in the inner office opposite." The note was written, and Mr. Martin Hewitt, without glancing at the address, thrust it into his pocket. When Ritter was safely in the inner office, however, he drew it out and read the address. "I see," he observed. "He uses the same name, Hunter. 27 Little Carton Street, Westminster, is the address, and there I shall go at once with the note. If the man comes here, I think you'd better lock him in with Ritter and send for a policeman. It may at least frighten him. My object is, of course, to get the man away, then, if possible, to invade his house in some way or other and steal or smash his negatives if they are there and to be found. Stay here in any case till I return, and don't forget to lock up those tracings." End of The Case of the Dixon Torpedo by Arthur Morrison, Part 1. Recording by Tony Maxey, Red Bluff, California.